Amy Rosen, Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, is connected to eCity, a licensee. Amy, thanks for joining me. Let's
Absolutely.
talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. Why is it so important for youth today in the inner cities and urban areas to be taught entrepreneurship as a skill set?
Well, first of all, I would argue that it's something that has belonged in American schools forever, that it is somewhat bizarre that we are a country that's, founded on small business, that all new net growth jobs are coming from businesses that have been in existence for 5 years or less, and that our economy is so dependent on it, yet we don't think that there's a place to talk about these things and even talk about money in public schools. So while historically we haven't done it, it's even more urgent now. Because as obviously manufacturing jobs get eliminated, and even for people who aren't going to be entrepreneurs, meaning they're not going to own their own company, they are going to work in companies of 30 or less. If you look at the projections ahead, and 30 or less companies, you have to be able to think like an entrepreneur. So being able, they don't have HR people. They don't, so whatever you do, you actually have to be taught to think in that kind of way. And also just have the basic knowledge that you can make financially responsible decisions. So, which is all part of sort of how you plan your future and where you're going to go.
The basics of entrepreneurship, it's been said entrepreneurs are born, but there's also a belief that while they may be born in some aspects of their personal traits that they demonstrate, it can be nurtured. How do you guys approach it?
Well, first of all, because we're at the Strategic Forum for Ernst & Young, I don't know if you got to see their recent report, but they just did a whole big piece of research that actually proves what I think many of us have always believed, that this is not a clear-cut question. There are people, and I have a child, 1 out of 3, that's going to be an entrepreneur. You can just tell that he thinks that way. He's going to be that way. But there are many, many people that become entrepreneurs after they even learn of the opportunity, and particularly because we work with low-income kids that often have not seen traditional jobs, have not been in communities where they have a lens of opportunity. So all we do is open their eyes a little bit to what is possible, and they just jump at it. So this is, they take sort of what might be their natural street smarts and develop them into business smarts, and the translation is there. Are those kids born that way, or are they not? I would argue that that anybody can learn to be an entrepreneur if they have the heart and passion to be so.
What traits would you say truly define entrepreneurs as these students are going through the system, as they're getting the training, as they're learning how to open their eyes, learning the financial skills, learning how to think differently? Let's just say ask the question, what if, on everything they see. What do you think that means to them?
So I think that the common trait that we see in many young people that ultimately become entrepreneurs is that they're comfortable with the ambiguity of risk, that they are extremely determined, and if there's an idea that they believe in, that they can actually stay laser-like focused and also be resilient. It's one of the reasons that a lot of kids from low-income communities make such natural good entrepreneurs, because unfortunately they've had to be so resilient, because you have to be able to go through failure to reach success. Now, I would also say that I think that this economy, that all of these young people are going to have to figure out their own pathways of success in it, is going to require that kind of thought more and more than it ever has.
Do you think it's really that idea of being risk tolerant and understanding that the risk-reward ratios is something that really becomes that key component that's taught to people?
Yeah, though I wouldn't even argue that at NIFTY, that isn't actually what we teach. We talk about that, and we bring thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs into classrooms every year throughout America, so they teach students. But what we teach is, and they talk about what it takes, but we teach, the part that can be learned in a classroom is things like being able to do your math so you can figure out your return on investment. And that, by the way, has the added benefit of connecting school to real life to kids, which is actually the key to keeping kids in school. So we've got 50% in some communities of African American and Hispanic kids dropping out of high school And if you actually start talking about opportunity and teach them some basic skill sets that allow them to do things, what we do at Nifty is every one of our young people completes a business plan. Every one of our young people has an opportunity to present that business plan, to compete in their classroom, then in the citywide, then nationally, and all the way through there. But those are, whether that becomes a business or whether it becomes a metaphor for sort of a plan for success, that's the tool we use. But there's hard skills, not just entrepreneurial thought, that people have to know in order to, to be successful at whatever business that they do. So I think that, the way in which we have found it successful, that kids can find their own ways to think like an entrepreneur if we create an environment where you can actually talk about that, think about that, do it through an idea, product, or service development. And just give them the basic knowledge. It drives me nuts that people say you can't teach this stuff, because let's just start with the basic skills that, it just to me is absolutely a disgrace in America that we're letting kids graduate high school without actually understanding what compound interest is. Now that sounds, absurd given everything else they have to learn. There's $1 trillion in student loan debt. It exceeds credit card debt today. Talking about spending all kinds of money with government programs trying to solve that. How about just equipping the kids with the basic knowledge to calculate compound interest and to understand the implications on their life? That stuff is, knowledge and can be taught. It can be taught to really young kids.
Yeah, this year you were appointed by the President as a Vice Chair of the President's Advisory Council on Financial Capability, and you're chairing the Youth Subcommittee on promoting financial literacy. So clearly these are ideas that you believe truly in. How can that be changed so that organizations like Nifty get integrated at not just urban schools, but at schools nationwide?
It needs to be, it needs to be the norm, not the exception. And it can't just be a one-off. One of the things that we're doing, and I have been privileged to be working with this group in Washington, and so being exposed to sort of everything that's out there. And we need to get we need to really incent both families and schools to be talking about these things from a very young age. We just developed something that we're calling money milestones, and I don't think they're perfect yet, and we're putting them out for public comment. But it's like, what should you talk to your 2-year-old about money? Making it easy for families. Like, there's things that you need and there's things that you want, and that's what money buys. All the way up to what should kids by the time they graduate high school know. So while programs like Nifty can play a big role in here, we really need to start at kindergarten, at preschool, and even as far back as 2-year-olds, and and move up kids. Mostly, what's the objective here? The objective here is that every young person in America should graduate high school with the basic skills to actually make reasonable financial decisions about how they invest in their education, how they invest in life, and ultimately to sort of be able to think like an entrepreneur about their lives, because that's what's going to allow them to find, each of them to find their own path to prosperity.
A lot of people have a fear of failure, and fear becomes a motivating factor in bad decision making. How do you teach at Nifty these young entrepreneurs, we'll call them young entrepreneurs, the ability to overcome or to take that fear and harness it?
Well, we have a whole series of experiences and activities that kids are highly engaged in, that they sort of play these roles out that work really, really well. But I'll tell you, the kids that we work with, because we work with, kids from low-income communities, they are, they're resilient or they don't make it. So, what we have to do is sort of connect those things to life, and they're much less risk adverse than some of our kids that are coming, from much more well-heeled schools. And by the way, those kids are just as important to think about this. I mean, it's good news in many ways, but it's also telling news. We're in 300 cities in China. It's exploding. We just got named the best charity in China through this huge social media competition. So in China, there's something going on, that actually everybody knows that they want to be entrepreneurs. In America, they just came out with a poll, said something like 73% of kids want to be their own bosses. They want to be their own bosses. They want to open their own businesses, and yet, you know, the same poll shows these enormous gaps in why they're, you know, and concerns about why they're not actually learning this stuff.
You know, you mentioned that you bring in entrepreneurs to help teach the courses, that you engage with your stakeholders on a pretty regular basis. How do you identify the ideas that you think are going to be incorporated within the curriculum that are going to be beneficial? Do you do a lot of test things in different cities, or do you have things that get rolled out uniformly?
Well, you know, we've been really fortunate because our founder, Steve Mariotti, is a genius, and he just has an intuitive sense, and he's been at this for 25 years. So we literally are on our 11th official edition of our curriculum. It changes all the time. It needs to be very, in some ways it needs to be you know, like a franchise, so that we give, because we train teachers, we give it to them, we like are explicit about how to do it because it's hard, and we make it easier for them. On the other hand, you know, we're constantly piloting new ideas. So in Baltimore, for instance, the superintendent of schools told me, you know, his biggest problem is he can't get kids through 9th grade algebra, which means they can't graduate high school. So he said, what can you do for my 8th graders? So we actually embedded NIFTY in a pre-algebra, because that's the math that's required anyhow class. And, you know, we're getting amazing results. We're underway, we've just begun a really formal integration around STEM into our program. We got named the best math textbook in America, even though we're not traditionally embedded in math classes. And you know, because we're trying to prepare kids for opportunities of tomorrow, we're doing things like, you know, we have a massive volunteer effort to get technology engineers, people who are in STEM related fields, in front of our kids before they come up with their idea of their business, so they literally can start thinking differently about their lives. So we do that all the time.
You know, one of the key traits of a successful entrepreneur is their ability to engage their stakeholders, their ability to listen, their ability to deliver service. How do you teach those traits? Because those are challenging ones.
It's really interesting. One of the things that works really, really well is that in addition to business plans, almost all of our kids do pitches. So they literally start with a 30-second to 60-second pitch around their business. And we bring volunteers in, lots and lots of volunteers into the classrooms, where we bring our students into their businesses, and we have them pitch them like they're pitching VC guys. And then they actually, like that interaction, you know, you giving me feedback on my pitch, that actually makes it relevant to them as an individual and appreciates their individuality in this, really starts getting their ears and, you know, and eyes open. So that presentation skills, you know, it's things as basic as, you know, we all the time, we just recently had Steve Case at our national competition, and you know, people again and again tell us that our kids are, you know, people who are pitched every day 1 million times, pitch, you know, as well or better than those kids because they know their financials, etc. If we can give those kind of skills to our kids, and as you said, listen and learn and actually act as if you know, they can, you know, the world, the doors just open up to them. We had a young person this year who won our national competition, who had a brilliant idea, brilliant business. It's being patented. I have no question that she's 15 years old, by the way, will be an enormous success. Her challenge, and she had all the brain powers to think like an entrepreneur, her issues were in presentation. She was very shy, very reserved, couldn't look people in the eye. 3 months before the national competition, I saw her do her pitch in LA, and I thought, this kid is going nowhere, because we had volunteers, mentors, our team people worked with her. She came to New York in front of, you know, the leading entrepreneurs of this country. She blew them out of the water. I mean, kids can do that. They just have to actually be taught and practice, and somebody has to take enough interest to care about it.
Fantastic. That's a great ending point.
Yeah.
Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excellent conversation.
Excellent.